Studying the ancient religions of the Egyptians, Babylonians, Chinese, and many other races in America and elsewhere, we find very clear traces of this ancestor worship being the beginning of religion. For example, you must have seen in pyramids in Egypt and and uh, and stored burial remains in China, like you have that skeleton of that famous king. So through that we find that people used to worship their ancestors earlier. With the ancient Egyptians, the first idea of the soul was that of a double. Every human body contained in it another being very similar to it, and when a man died, this double went out of the body and it lived on. But the life of the double lasted only so long as the dead body remained intact, and that is why we find among the Egyptians that so much solicitude to keep the body uninjured. That is, they just used to uh, keep the body solicited into into what should I say, into the mummified form, and along with some household items also, because they believed that uh, the body is like a double, and kind of they believed in afterlife. But the life of the double lasted only so long as the double body remained intact, and that is why they built those huge pyramids in which they preserved the bodies. For if any portion of this external body was hurt, the double would be correspondingly injured. This is clearly ancestor worship. With the ancient Babylonians, we find the same idea of the double, but with a variation. The double lost all sense of love, it frightened the living to give it food and drink and to help it in various ways. It even lost all affection for its own children and its own life. Among the ancient Hindus also, we find traces of this ancestor worship. Among the Chinese, the basis of their religion may also be said to be ancestor worship, and it still permeates the length and breadth of that vast country. In fact, the only religion that can really be said to flourish in China is that of ancestor worship. Thus, it seems, on one hand, a very good position is made out for those who hold the theory of ancestor worship as the beginning of religion, because we find that the civilization of China and Egypt, and then Indus Valley civilization, these are one of the oldest civilizations, and we find the traces of ancestor worship there, which are something out of a belief, something supernatural. So we can conclude that uh, in a certain way that the religion started with ancestor worship. On the other hand, there are scholars who from the ancient Aryan literature show that religion originated in nature worship. Although in India we find proofs of ancestor worship everywhere, yet in the oldest records there is no trace of it whatsoever. In the Rig Veda Samhita, the most ancient records of the Aryan race, we do not find any trace of it. Modern scholars think it is the worship of nature that they find there. The human mind seems to struggle to get a peep behind the scenes. The dawn, the evening, the hurricane, the stupendous and gigantic forces of nature, its beauties, these have exercised the human mind, and it aspires to go beyond to understand something about them. That is since the starting, uh, when the struggle for the survival was always there, uh, and the lifespan used to be quite short. Life was full of challenges. Then people face all these challenges, and it all kind of made them curious to know about these things, and they and as a side effect they started building up their own beliefs. In the struggle they endowed these phenomena with personal attributes, giving them souls and bodies, because the man was familiar with living beings, so it kind of started associating those natural phenomena also with living beings. because living beings was what he was kind of interacting with all the time. Something that could move on its own, that could talk, that could endanger them. Like they were always facing threats, facing dangers with animals. So in that sense, they kind of started taking the living beings as something special, sometimes beautiful, sometimes transcendent. Every attempt ends by these phenomena becoming abstractions, whether personalized or not. So also it is found with the ancient Greeks. Their whole mythology is simply this abstracted nature worship. So also with the ancient Germans, the Scandinavians, and all the other Aryan races. For example, you find, if you go uh, towards the medieval, or before that, uh, Celtic and Scandinavian part, we find that there were Vikings, and before that also there were pagan religions. They kind of worshipped the nature around them. Thus, on this side, too, a very strong case has been made out that religion has its origin in the personification of the powers of nature.